tonight, all the way from that other province.
When I like to, I always like visiting Alberta for all kinds of reasons, but one of the lines I used to use opening up my remarks was always about how much I love Alberta and visiting it, and it always fills me with great pride all the things that the province has accomplished. And I like to say that the people of Saskatchewan have built two wonderful provinces in this country. So many people so many people from Saskatchewan ended up in Alberta, and it's great to see all the things that they've accomplished.
Yeah, my favorite line about Saskatchewan is, I think, from Brad Wall. It's where he said it's easy to draw and hard to spell.
Yes, yeah, that too.
Yeah, mostly these days I just hope people forget about it. Like here in Alberta, we like to think we're like the promised land, the free place, and all this kind of stuff. But you guys are giving us a run for the money these days, I'll tell you.
Well, when we had Premier Wall, and you had Rachel Notley, it was amazing how many people in Alberta were asking about what it says in the Constitution about making trades for premiers.
It's not hockey here, eh?
That's right.
Yeah, so, all right, we'll get started here. Thanks for joining us, everyone, tonight. We got a great guest up for this evening. Welcome, Mr. Scheer, to Northern Alberta, or as I like to call it, the Promised Land. I think I screwed you up one time at a public event around that, because everyone, I not only do I call Northern Alberta the Promised Land here at home, but I also do that in Alberta, or in Ottawa all the time. And one time I was being introduced by Mr. Scheer at a public event, and he couldn't remember my riding name, but all he could remember was the Promised Land. So I would have been all right if you'd just called it that, for sure. So
yeah, no, you are a great promoter for your riding. There's no doubt about that. Every opportunity you get in caucus or with your colleagues, you're always talking about the wonderful aspects of the place that you represent.
Yeah, I don't know if you were involved at all when I was negotiating to actually change the riding name.
Well, I think I might have been house leader when you first proposed the idea, and at first I thought you're kind of being humorous, but is this something that you've come up with, or is that kind of like a local tagline? Like, what's the background on that? Because
at first I thought you're kind of being
no, it was like, yeah, it's something that's just kind of developed. I'm not sure where the original idea came from, but just the fact that we're the honey capital of, like, we have the honey capital of Canada, a little town called Falher. So that's kind of where I got the idea from. So it's flowing with milk and honey.
Okay, gotcha.
So I always say we've got 7,500 dairy animals and the honey capital of Canada. So we're literally flowing with milk and honey. Okay. Dale, you're not on mute there. Thanks, Dale.
So I will accept it.
Yeah. So, but I had Luc Bergtol, another one of our colleagues, out, and he's from Quebec, and he is the maple syrup capital of Canada. So together it's all pretty sweet,
Yeah. Well, there you are. Well, I love Northern Alberta. The first time I visited Northern Alberta was, I believe, you were there. We went to a rodeo in Lacrete back in 2016. Yeah, that was the furthest north in Alberta I've ever been, and it was a wonderful rodeo with tons of fantastic people. Now, is that town still in your riding? Because I think that was right on the border, maybe.
Yeah.
Just in yours?
Just in mine, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So, yeah, it's a big Mennonite community up there.
Yeah.
We have the rodeo, like most rodeo. I don't know about where you're from, but most rodeos around here, they have, at one point during the rodeo, they put a ribbon on the tail of a calf, and then all the kids go in there, and one of them catches the calf and pulls the ribbon off, and whichever one gets it, they win a bike or something like that. Of course,
yeah. No, we have that in my riding too, yeah.
Yeah. And it's always funny when you go up to Lacrete, like, there's so many kids up there that the half the arena gets filled up, and you can't find the calf back. It's great.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So, it's it must be a little more interesting to watch things from the sidelines, so to speak, other than from when your time as leader. But for folks that aren't aware, what inspired you to get in politics? So what's your story a little on that?
Sure. Well, it's kind of hard to pinpoint, exactly what had that spark of making me interested in politics. My father worked for a newspaper and I delivered the newspaper actually as well. So I was a pretty voracious reader when I was young, and I used to read the paper cover to cover before I went out and delivered it. And my dad was always talking current events and politics and philosophy. My dad had a great educational background, and he's the type of guy that if you ask him a question about politics, he'll give you the word origin about the term that you just asked. And if I had said, what does the word veto mean? Well, he didn't just tell me what it meant. He'd say, well, it dates back to ancient Rome when the tribunes of the people used to sit outside the Senate, and that's what they would shout to. So that's the kind of upbringing I got, with this kind of intense, almost overload of political philosophy and history. And when we were watching the news, he'd always, you couldn't pause the TV in those days, but during the commercials, he'd put the TV on mute and kind of explain all the background. So I was always really interested in it. But I believe, over time, a bit of a problem with authority developed in myself. The sense of rules for the sake of rules, or other people telling you what you can and cannot do. And I had a couple butting of heads with my parents and teachers, and my dad had to kind of channel that a little bit and say, well, there's legitimate authority in your life, and you do have to respect teachers and parents and coaches and things like that. But you have this wonderful gift in Canada that if you don't like the rules, as you get older, you can get involved and change the rules. And so that really appealed to me. If I was going to have to live under government regulations and government laws, well, I certainly wanted to have my say, do the best I could to have them shaped in the way that I believe that they should be shaped. And that, combined with one other lesson that my parents both taught me, they were both involved in their unions, not because they were necessarily, accepting of the kind of ideology that often comes from the NDP and things like that, but mostly because they knew the power of showing up. They would say, my dad used to always say, half the battle is showing up. And if there is a particular tense period of time with a potential strike or whatever issue, it's the 12 to 24 people who show up on a Saturday morning to take a vote on some of these things that actually steer the direction. So wanting to have a say in what the rules were all about, and knowing that in many things in life, just showing up and being counted is half the battle, I decided to get involved, and I was knocking on doors and helping out in campaigns. As soon as I turned 18 in 1997 was the first time I kind of got engaged. And I love, one of the best aspects about politics is you get to meet so many wonderful people who share values, who share beliefs, and working together in a constructive way it was just such a rewarding experience. And that's why I kind of developed a career in it.
Mm-hmm. And then you ran for leader.
Yeah, well, there's a few steps in between. Yeah. Well, I ran in 2004. So back in 2004, I'm not sure what it was like in Alberta, but in Saskatchewan, the merger of the two parties, the Canadian Alliance and the PC party. In Saskatchewan, we had a lot of what were called Orchardites, David Orchard PCers. And so it wasn't clear that Saskatchewan was going to endorse the merger of the two parties. And I got involved to just do what I could to help make sure that both the Canadian Alliance and the PC riding associations in the Regina area both endorsed the merger of the two parties. And decided soon after that, I also supported Stephen Harper in his leadership race. And so when the time came to open up nominations, I thought to myself, well, I've met a lot of people and worked on an organizational way, so threw my hat in the ring. So got elected in 2004, and developed a bit of an interest in procedure, which was a little bit surprising even to me, because I was always very passionate about policy. And but I quickly learned, as you may have too, Arnold, that when you get to Parliament, especially as a first time as an elected position, people who know the rules and how to maximize the rules and use the rules to their advantage definitely have a leg up. And so I thought that I could help out the team if I became a bit of an expert on procedure and things like that. And it worked. I developed a bit of a niche for myself, ran for speaker in 2011, and was elected as the youngest speaker in Canadian history. After the 2015 election, when our party was kind of looking for, people to throw their hat in the ring, I believed it would be a good I had something to offer the party. Someone who was from Eastern Canada, originally born there, had definitely had some history there, but had moved to Saskatchewan to make a life for me and my family, and a bit of East meets West, and on the younger side, as well as having an executive level position in being speaker, but a little bit independent. So that's kind of what led to me running for the leadership in 2016.
Mm-hmm. Being the speaker, you're kind of responsible for the entire parliamentary precinct. That's something that I wasn't aware of before I got elected, as and I'm sure most people aren't. Like, what would have been one of the more interesting pieces of that? So you're responsible for everything from parking to which color of plants they choose and how the flags are organized and all that kind of stuff. Or
not quite down to that granular level of detail, but you are right in a great respect. Being speaker is kind of like being the minister of a mid-sized department. You've got 300, at the time it was 308 MPs, and each one of those MPs has an office budget and staff. There's everything from translation to security guards to postal and printing services. There's a couple of different, I can't remember off the top of my head now, but several different collective bargaining units that that all report up through the various HR departments to ultimately the speaker. So there's definitely a lot going on, and watching the speaker for any of you who watch CPAC and see the speaker during question period, that is just a snapshot of what he or she is actually responsible for. There's actually a great deal behind the scenes that goes on. In terms of interesting, the most kind of impactful event that happened was, of course, the shooting, where we had a gunman enter the parliament and shoot at people, and had just killed Canadian Armed Forces personnel right by the War Memorial, Nathan Cirillo. And not only that incident itself, but then the aftermath of that too. How do you balance keeping the parliamentary precinct something that is open, that people feel like it's their institution, they can enter when they wish, they can watch the proceedings, but at the same time understanding that unfortunately in this modern world of ours, there are people who are out to do harm, and how do you balance off the need for safety and security with openness and accessibility? And so that was definitely something that was challenging, something that is definitely not in the speaker handbook of tips and tricks of how to navigate through, and it was something that a lot of us had to kind of feel as we went forward. But I'm pretty satisfied with the results of what came after that, the various studies that we undertook to prove that. I think the Hill has in many ways achieved that balance.
We chuckle about the current speaker having to deal with all the COVID and the new rules around that. I imagine that was not what he signed up for when he would put his hat in the ring to run there.
No, exactly.
And jumping in like he really didn't even have time to get his feet underneath him before it all happened there. So.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Hannan.
Yeah.
Who is Daniel Hannan, and how did you meet him?
Well, Daniel Hannan was a member of the European Parliament. I believe he is still a contributing columnist to a couple of different UK news outlets, and he's an author, and he is a great conservative thinker. And I kind of reached out to him. I noticed one of his YouTube videos back, as I recall, in the early days of YouTube, kind of politicians using YouTube as a way to bypass the mainstream media and just get kind of a message out. And there is a great exchange in the European Parliament. If any of you want to kind of watch some fun videos before you fall asleep tonight, the former Prime Minister of the UK, Gordon Brown, was at the European Parliament, and Daniel Hannan just eviscerated him, talking about how his big government socialist policies had really weakened the UK. That during the good times, during the good economic times, other countries had used the prosperity to pay down debt, to strengthen their economic resilience, but that because Gordon Brown had pursued these horrible policies, horrible fiscal policies, horrible monetary policies, he left the UK in such a terrible position. So that's when I first kind of noticed him, and then I started following him, reading some of his material, and he just had this great intellectual conservatism, where it wasn't just kind of superficial talking points. It was like some really deep thoughts and really excellent ways of explaining why conservatives believe what we believe in, and why we know that our policies lead to better qualities of life for people wherever our policies are tried. And so I reached out to him. He was in Ottawa for a Manning conference, and I heard that he was going to be in town. I reached out to his office, and we were able to connect and have a lunch, and we've kind of been friends ever since. Message each other every once in a while. He came to convention back in Halifax.
You introduced me to him then, and had a lot of. I thought he was an interesting character, and I was just wondering how in the world there's a member of Canadian Parliament run across a fellow from the EU Parliament. So
yeah, it was just I saw his video, thought it was fantastic, reached out, and he responded, so we kind of kept it up.
Okay. You're in kind of an interesting position, in fact, by the fact of being the leader and now coming back to being sitting a member of Parliament. I'm not sure that's a. I think Diefenbaker did that, but other than that, it's not a. I guess there hasn't been too many leaders in our party. So, but nonetheless, what's the perspective on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think I'd have to go back and look and see exactly how many. Obviously, there are a few leaders recently that have done it on some of the other parties. It was difficult after the election. And I knew the toll that it had taken on my family, and when Jill and I had many conversations before I ran for leadership, a big thing was, could we handle it? And we had this very young family. We had our last child, Mary, was born in 2015. So here I am, 2016, contemplating running for the leadership of the opposition party, not just a part-time position at all. And my wife's nephew had been going through a very serious medical issue that thankfully turned out well. So there's a lot of stress in our life, and a new baby. I think I wanted to make sure that everybody was on board and it was possible. And you kind of intellectually get to a place where you say, yes, we can do this. We've mapped it out. We can, but then you live it. You kind of go through it, and it's never as easy as you might tell yourself that it is. And it was very, very difficult. So after the election, we were just physically and mentally exhausted and disappointed. I had expected to defeat Justin Trudeau and win more seats. In retrospect, certainly, expectations were raised in the lead up and during the campaign, but we did achieve a lot, to win the popular vote, to win, up 8 seats in British Columbia, net up in Ontario, get some seats back in Atlantic Canada. There's a lot of positives there, but there's also, on my own personal level, a great sense of exhaustion, and so I kind of looked at the road ahead and made the decision that I would have had to have been either a bad father or a bad leader. I would have had to. I would have had to take time away from being leader to really make sure that I could get my family back on track, or I would have to tell my family, I know I've put you on hold for a couple of years, and I've told you everything will be all right after October 2019, but I just need to punt the ball there and focus on being a leader. And I didn't think it was fair to you and your colleagues in our caucus to give you less than 100% as leader. And I certainly couldn't ask my wife or my kids to accept anything less than 100% as a father and a husband. And so I made that decision. Now, coming back into the benches, for sure, you know, there are days where I kind of think, watching Trudeau do what he's doing, and you know, but by and large, it's just been fantastic. You know, I love my riding of Regina Capel. I've really, I was talking about COVID in the speaker. I was kind of planning on coming back to Regina and throwing myself into community events and reconnecting with friends and supporters. And of course, COVID has meant none of that really is happening. So our leader, Aaron O'Toole, has given me a great portfolio, which I really enjoy, the infrastructure portfolio. So I'm really pouring myself into that, getting reconnected with my hometown here in Saskatchewan, and it's all been fantastic. And spending lots of time, a lot more time with my family than I would have had I, stayed on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your transport shadow credit?
Infrastructure, yeah.
Infrastructure.
Stephanie Kuzi is transport, and I'm infrastructure. So
your infrastructure. Yeah. All right.
We work closely together.
The big piece of infrastructure that everybody's concerned about here in Alberta is pipes in the ground, pipelines, private sector infrastructure mostly. How does your portfolio overlap with that? That's probably what most folks are interested in. We also got, I think they said the other day, we're shipping 400,000 barrels of oil out of Alberta on railways. Mm-hmm. That would be the equivalent. Like, I think the Keystone XL would pump about 500,000 barrels a day. So we're nearly at a Keystone XL level with the railway. I'm sure that comes up here and there.
Yeah, before the election, after the election, well, especially since the election, when there's been talk about, how do you kickstart the economy, how do you get things going again, and well, hey, I know of a way to get billions of dollars of private sector into the economy, people back to work, and all kinds of value-added jobs all the way along. It's called pipelines, and one of the most damning indictment of Justin Trudeau's record on energy is the fact that the Trans Mountain pipeline had to get built by government, and it's not even completed yet. Here we had a situation where before Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister, the private sector wanted to put their own money into our economy, and particularly with Trans Mountain, it was mostly U.S. investors. The Kinder Morgan. This is these are U.S. dollars coming into Canada. We talk all the time about attracting foreign investment. Let's get other people who have earned money in other countries to take the money that they've earned and bring it into Canada, invest it in our country, and so we get the benefit of it. And not only did that not happen, but Trudeau had to write them a check to leave our country. And the gall of the Liberals, and also, quite frankly, the mainstream media, because instantly a lot of the media were saying, well, look at it, he must be, you can't accuse him of not supporting the energy sector because look at it, he's buying a pipeline, and you say, well, no, you're looking at this the wrong way. He's chased away the investment. He's forcing people to have their tax dollars go to pay for this pipeline, and this is never needed to been happening in modern Canadian history. We haven't needed the government to do it because we had a robust energy sector. So very, very frustrating. Of course, Energy East was one of the most frustrating projects to be killed for me for two very important reasons. One, this was a project that would have brought in Western Canadian energy into Eastern Canadian markets. That would have displaced foreign oil. There's Saudi oil coming into the St. John's refinery. There's Venezuelan oil. There's Algerian oil, U.S. oil coming into Canadian markets. And here we have a west to east pipeline that would have displaced that, get us off foreign oil. And it's always been frustrating for me to watch radical anti-energy protesters chain themselves to trees in British Columbia to block pipelines for us to export our oil to other markets, but I don't see them lining up and down the St. Lawrence trying to block the tanker after tanker of foreign oil that's coming into our country. And that double standard as a Westerner has always been infuriating and has only been made worse since the last election and Trudeau's approach to these things. The second reason is the way that they killed it. The government forced the national energy regulators to make the Energy East pipeline account for both upstream and downstream emissions. So this is something that's never happened before. GM, Ford, Chrysler, they don't have to account for the greenhouse CO2 emissions, both upstream and downstream. They just have to account for what they actually do when they make the cars, and Bombardier doesn't have to do that for their jets. Only Western Canadian energy projects were forced to account for both the upstream and downstream, and that ultimately is what led to its cancellation. So it's been extremely frustrating. I live in Regina. We've got a steel plant. Evraz Steel makes large diameter pipe for pipeline projects. Almost 600 men and women lost their job just before Christmas because there are no new orders here in Canada. And it's not like people are driving less. It's not like there are fewer cars on the road around the world today than there were 5 years ago. It's pre-pandemic. Obviously the pandemic has changed things, but the world is using more and more energy, more and more oil and gas. I believe that it's better for the world for us to develop our natural resources rather than some of these states that have horrible human rights records, that use their profits on their energy sector to fund terrorism, international terrorism, horrible abuses on human rights, and terrible environmental regulations. I'd rather that barrel of oil be taken out of the ground right here in Canada, putting Canadians to work at the highest environmental standards, and Canadians through their pensions, through their mutual funds, through their the roads they drive on, the schools they go to, they benefit from the proceeds of all that wonderful economic activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. While back, I was kind of probably one of the first public events you did after Aaron O'Toole became the leader. You were standing in front of a statue in Regina, it was on Facebook there, you and Mr. Cram, the other Regina.
Yeah, and Warren Stiley.
And Warren Stiley.
Yeah.
Whatever happened with that? Tell us the story a little bit and what all went down there.
Yeah, well, like many city councils around the country, all of a sudden there was this big movement to tear down aspects of our history, to tear down reminders of historical figures in Canada's development. And in the last municipal election, there's been quite a few radical left-wing councillors who have gotten elected, and so they've been using various motions at City Council here to drive that left-wing agenda. And so of course Johnny MacDonald was one of the things that we had a statue in Victoria Park, and some groups here, and some city councilors kind of led the charge, and so City Council had to make a decision. So back in the summer, when it was kind of announced what the next steps were in the consultation process, our leader Aaron O'Toole had been very vocal about standing up for our history and criticizing those who would tear down statues. I don't know if you remember the statue of Johnny MacDonald in Montreal was just toppled by radical protesters, and while I was leader, this was a important point that I made too. So we decided the three of us here in Regina to say, sometimes it's the groups that make the most noise that get the most attention, but there are a lot of people who may not come out to a protest, who may not appear before City Hall. And so we decided to have a rally of support for keeping the John A. MacDonald statue up. It was very, very successful. We had thousands of people sign the online petition and watch the various streaming channels. And we did have a couple of protesters who showed up, used a ton of profanities and extremely disrespectful, but we're clearly not interested in actually discussing the facts. There's just a lot of people are accusing Johnny MacDonald things he never actually did. They accused him of passing the Indian Act. Well, that was something that a Liberal prime minister actually did, and when you look at what Johnny MacDonald tried to do in terms of expanding the franchise to First Nations, and I'm not going to defend everything anybody has ever done. We're all flawed human beings, and some of our with the light of today's ability to analyze these things. There are a lot of things that John A. MacDonald did that we wouldn't tolerate today, but we don't honor him for the bad things he did. We honor him for the good things that he did, creating the best country in the world, creating Canada, forging it together with East and West and French and English, Catholic, Protestant, Indigenous, and new Canadians, and it's as imperfect as it has been throughout its history. It's still someplace that people have gone through tremendous difficulty to try to come to. It has been a beacon of light and hope for the world for over 150 years, and that's something we're celebrating. And we can absolutely educate people about some of the bad things that happened while he was prime minister, some of the bad things he said, some of the things today, like I said, we wouldn't tolerate today. But for heaven's sake, if we start to tear these things down, who would be left? Liberal Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier had terrible racist immigration policies, signing executive orders that the Black people weren't allowed to immigrate to Canada. Mackenzie King turning boatloads of Jewish refugees away, and sympathizing with Nazi Germany before the war started. So it's I thought it was important to stand up and tell that side of the story.
Well, I thank you for doing that. I really appreciated it, and I know many of people back home noticed. I shared the video when you were doing it there. And
can I just flag something? I just got a note up on my computer that the House of Commons is going to force my computer to restart at 9:49.
9:49.
Yeah. So 7:49 Ottawa time. So if that happens, I will log back on my phone. So that I'll see if I can disable that. But if you might lose me for a few minutes, then I'll pop back on.
All right.
Okay.
All right. The latest deal I've been seeing on Twitter and things like that is there's 9,000 missing infrastructure projects. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Well, we're trying to get some information on it. It's a little bit strange, don't you think? That how do you lose an infrastructure project? These are usually things like bridges and ports and
the Liberals have been redefining investment, and maybe they've been redefining infrastructure too. I'm not sure, but
no, you're right. They are counting a lot of things that we would never have counted as. What the parliamentary budget officer has told us is that Catherine McKenna and the Liberals made this claim. They funded, I think their claim was 53,000 infrastructure projects. We funded 53,000. So the parliamentary budget officer said, "Great, let's see them. Let's what are you talking about? Well, give us a list." Well, they gave them a list, and they were 9,000 projects short. That so we said, "Well, look, did you get the number wrong? Was it 44,000, not 53,000?" He said, "No, it's 53,000." So, as near as we can tell, and it's been difficult because the parliamentary budget officer has come and given very clear testimony, but then Catherine McKenna came the other day, and now she's claiming that they did them. What we believe has happened is that there's about 9,000 projects where the government hasn't asked for any proof that the project was actually completed. Now, normally when you're dealing with the city, it's not, it's quite easy. You say, well, you applied for this money, you said it was going to go to a bridge. Where's the bridge? And they say, well, there's the bridge, and they take pictures of it or whatever. But what the government does with what they call there's a number of what they call trusted partners, where they don't actually ask for any of the follow-up. Those trusted partners could be groups that work with CMHC. Sometimes they can be First Nations organizations. Sometimes they can be other branches of government. So we're trying to get from the government an evaluation to say, like, where are all these projects? If in fact in some cases you just wrote the check and didn't ask for any proof. Back to your point, Arnold, they are calling a lot of things infrastructure that have never been considered infrastructure before. And so we're trying to get a handle on and trying to get a straight answer out of this Liberal government is just next to impossible.
So there is 53,000 projects that there has been money spent on, but you're unable to. So the money is gone, but the project isn't outlined properly, or what's the deal?
Yeah. So essentially, in a kind of Coles Notes way of saying it, that's exactly right. That the money's been sent. But there hasn't been any follow-up to say, like, okay, has the project been completed? Where is it? How's it doing? And the Auditor General found this out too. She said in her report that the department doesn't even track whether or not their programs are hitting their own targets. So they say, this infrastructure program is going to do A, B, and C, and they have built in no mechanism to actually say, are we doing A, B, and C? And for anybody who's ever worked in the private sector, you would never keep your job if that was the case. If you say to your boss, give me $100,000, I'm going to have a marketing campaign and I'm going to attract 1,000 new customers. Well, in 6 months or 8 months, whatever you say, the boss is going to say, well, how many new customers did you get? You said you're going to spend this money to get what's our new client list? Or if you say we're going to buy this piece of machinery so we can increase our output by 20%, well, okay, how much more have we increased output? And only, it seems, in the Liberal government do they not even keep track of their own targets. So we're certainly digging deep on this. In addition to that, we just found out last week that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank has gifted $655 million to a multi-billion-dollar energy company to build an electrical connection between Ontario and the northern US, which was already going to get built. So here we have a situation where so many business owners are losing everything. I have friends of mine who own restaurants who are done. They're broke. Some of them have had to sell their house, and they're finished at 48, 52. Their whole life savings has evaporated because governments have been telling them that they're not allowed to operate. And here comes Justin Trudeau with a check for $655 million to an energy company called Fortis Inc. Fortis Inc. made $8.9 billion worth of revenue last year. They paid out over $800 million to their shareholders. This was this connector project in Lake Erie, underneath Lake Erie. It was already going to get built. It was already on the books planning. They were bragging about how they just needed a couple of servicing agreements in. And we just found out last week through the Canadian Infrastructure Bank that they gave $655 million in corporate welfare to this massive energy company. So that's what's been keeping me pretty busy these weeks, trying to get the media to pay attention to this. This is outrageous. Remember when they gave $50 million to MasterCard about a year or so ago?
12 million to Loblaws.
Well, this is like 10 times that to a massively profitable private sector company. I don't believe your tax dollars should go into corporate welfare. If this project is so good, then let the shareholders pay for it. Let them forego a year's worth of dividends, and the company will build this connector and all the profits will go. And if it's such a great profit, then everybody will win. The shareholders will get bigger dividends next year, the project will get built, and taxpayers won't be on the hook for it.
Wow. And that seems to one thing the Auditor General, I think, noted this once as well, is that for Liberals, the success is how much money they've spent on things. I gave a speech the other day around like the COVID response, and the lack of budgeting is we just don't know what we're getting. We've paid for a Rolls Royce. Are we getting a Rolls Royce or are we getting a K car? But they just say, well, we've spent this amount of money, therefore we've been successful. Which is like,
I can imagine trying to convince my wife of that. Andrew, you said you're going to build a deck and there's no deck. Well, I've spent $12,000 on lumber and supplies, and but there's no deck here. You said you were going to build this deck. Well, don't worry. Next year, next month, I'm going to spend another $4,000 on the deck. Well, I'm not interested in how much money you're spending on the deck. I want a deck for patio furniture and a barbecue. Tell me when you got the deck. And most people in their private lives, in their business lives, they brag about how much they get for the least amount the money to spend. Nobody, people love a bargain. They come home and they say, well, I bought a secondhand the other day. I borrowed a friend of mine's log splitter. We're splitting logs for our fire pit, and talking about what a great deal he got on it. And most people like to say, I got this great value for the least amount of money. And with the Liberals, it's the opposite. Their metric for success is how much money they've spent on it, how expensive it is. And when Conservatives come along and say, yeah, but what are you getting for that money? Then they just try to say, well, if you don't agree on spending this outrageous amount of money for poor results, well, then you must hate issue A. Or
well, the border example is a case in point, right? It's like we say like, hey, you're not managing the border properly. We've got all kinds of people running across the border. Our border, it doesn't seem to be a border. And they say, well, don't worry, unlike the Conservative, we're spending piles of money on it. Like when you were in government, you actually reduced the funding for border services. I'm like, yeah, and we didn't have anybody running across the border, right? Not only did we spend less, we also didn't have a problem with people running across the border. Like
you spent less and got more. How dare you?
yeah, it's just like the logic is baffling to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, but how do we capture that narrative? That's the challenge about it. Like it's frustrating. They say, well, this is how much we spend on it, and people are like, oh yeah. That's a big challenge. There's no doubt. So yeah, there's a Invest in Canada fund for $188 billion as well. What's the story on that one?
Well, again, the Auditor General has made some very serious findings about lack of accountability, lack of internal mechanisms. She was very, very harsh in her critique. This is a department that's in shambles. We found out we just got an order paper question back yesterday. So for those of you watching or on the call, members of Parliament have the ability, in addition to question period, which are called oral questions, we're allowed to submit what are called written questions. And written questions are usually a little bit more technical. It's not really meant for the clippable moment. You can kind of get into the weeds of things. And there is a more of an onus on the government to actually answer the question. So I asked a question through an order paper question on how much money was committed and how much money was actually spent in the first term of this Liberal government, so from 2015 to 2019. And in the Investing in Canada plan, they were about $8 billion short. So, Liberals run around talking about cuts. Well, they actually cut $8 billion from, and it wasn't even really like a cut. It was more just they had such a cumbersome program. It had the effect of a cut, but it wasn't like they made a conscious decision of let's spend less money. They actually got the worst of both worlds. They allocated all that money and then didn't get anything built to show for it. So we still have these big, massive deficits, but without any of the benefit of having better roads or increased port capacity or what have you. And what we're hearing from mayors across the country is that applications go to Ottawa to die. They put these applications in. There are so many lenses now. What I mean by a lens is the government has this top-down, Ottawa knows best approach where they say, well, we're going to look at this through whether this achieves some of what the Liberals' ideological objectives. And what many municipalities are finding out is that, for the city of Regina doesn't need the same type of fundings for, say, public transit as Vancouver, Toronto, perhaps even Calgary. Liberal government announced a fund for bike lanes. Now, I have my own views on bike lanes in general. I live in a city where it's pretty difficult and some people do, but most people find it very difficult to cycle in, say, October through April in the city of Regina. And if the city of Regina wants to fund bike lanes, I think that's something that the mayor and council should be held accountable for. I don't know why the government needs to have a one-size-fits-all approach. So these are the types of things that they're doing, and it's causing a bunch of delays. And as a result, we're not getting the same economic impact that we might have if a Conservative government was being more strategic with its spending. I think back to when the previous Conservative government funded the Asia Pacific Gateway terminal corridor. So that's tons of infrastructure projects all through Western Canada to increase our logistical capacity, our ability to get things to market, goods to market. Had huge economic spin-offs in so many communities across Western Canada. That's the type of strategic thinking we brought, where we had a vision and really built things. What the Liberals are doing right now is just it's incoherent.
Yeah, that's been my kind of sense of it as well, is that like governing takes effort and coordination, and there just does not seem to be a lot of coordination between any of, like, even in terms of infrastructure, but also then like between infrastructure and trade, or infrastructure and foreign policy and things like that. Had a number of people come in. Not really connected to your file at all, but just would like to get maybe your sense of things in Canada's relationship with China and the United States and that interplay.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start with China. It's been made abundantly clear that the hopes that we may have had for China back 10, 15 years ago are not panning out. When I was really first starting to be engaged with China, there were signs that the communist regime was open to reform. The Soviet Union had collapsed, the wall came down, and people were hopeful. Now, if I cut off here, it's not because China has stopped me from criticism. It's just because the update is going to happen. I promise I'll log back on, but so there's this great sense of hope that people would see the folly of communism, and that those who had been denied freedom for so long would fight to take it, and that those people in power would give it to them. Here we are in 2020, even 2021, even a few years ago, it was clear that that's just not happening under this current regime. They have become even more autocratic. They have become even more disrespectful for human rights. And there are already signs that Canada should have taken a tougher approach to China.
And he's gone. Well, folks, I think he'll be back here shortly. We've got a few more minutes here before the top of the hour, so I'm looking forward to that. Hello, Karina. Thanks for joining us here from Northern Sunrise County, I believe. Yeah, it is around the energy projects. It's definitely very frustrating to see our lack of vision that's coming from the federal government at this point. We continue to be champions to get rid of Bill C-69 and C-48. C-48 was the bill that banned shipping of our natural resources off of the West Coast, and C-69, we call it the No More Pipelines bill, where the new Environmental Assessment Act that basically guarantees that we're not going to be building any more pipelines in this country. Both of those we're committed to repealing, and so I'm hopeful that after the next election we'll have a conservative government that can take action on those two fronts for sure, as well as repealing the carbon tax. Carbon tax is a massive drain on our economy that does nothing to reduce emissions. So it looks like we got Mr. Scheer back with us. So
sorry about that.
does seem a little frightening on the. Oh,
that's
yeah.
right. Yeah, this time it wasn't the communist regime. So I think I was talking about kind of the early signs that that Canada needed to rethink its relationship with China, and nothing has brought two events that really bring it to the forefront, kind of highlighted. It's the case of the genocide against the Uyghur Muslims, and of course the two Michaels. And when the government of China abducted the two Michaels and started holding them illegally, my message to Justin Trudeau was, you need to stand up to the bully. When a country like China starts pushing us around, why would they stop? Why would they ever stop pushing us around, threatening us, doing whatever they would want with us when they don't face any repercussions? There's no downside to them. He hasn't done anything to stand up for Canada, and so I called on the government to do a few things. One was to expel the various people who are connected with various embassies. So in Canada, we grant diplomatic protection to ambassadors and people who work in consular offices and embassies, but there are lots of other people in Canada who have connections with the Chinese embassy that aren't really involved in the diplomatic corps. I said, let's expel them all. If you're not actually working in an embassy, then get out, because a lot of these people are engaged in spreading disinformation throughout the diaspora. You'll see Chinese government-owned outlets promoting the party line, trying to sow division within the Chinese community. And if they're going to use some of that propaganda tools to criticize our government and try to spread lies about why the two Michaels are being held, then why would we put up with that as a country? In addition to that, I called for increased inspections on Chinese goods. That would accomplish two things. One, have a real economic impact on China, and at the same time allow Canada to crack down on things like opioid trafficking and allow us, a lot of the opioids coming in from China, and that would give us the ability to crack down on more of it, seize more of it. A couple of other things, but anyway, all that to say is this government's not taking any of that seriously. I think
I can jump in there for a second. Right here we've got some good Peace River honey. But one of the interesting things is that, like, I've written several letters to Canadian Border Service Agency and the agriculture ministers around the Chinese make fake honey. Like they use corn syrup, pour Canadian pollen in it, and call it #1 Canadian honey. And that whole like inspection piece would be for my constituents anyways, is be really important, because
for sure
we're competing with like in North America, we're competing with fake honey from China. So it's
fake honey, counterfeit products, intellectual property theft, hacking. I mean, just the things that the government of China admit to would be enough for us to cut off, to have some kind of retaliatory measure to other countries. Look, they need to sell. A lot of times, okay, I'm getting another message about restarting. This is very frustrating. Okay, talk amongst yourselves for a few seconds, and then I'll come right back in.
All right. Well, that was something. Yeah, the honey episode is always for interesting, just around the we build testing mechanisms. So one of the ways that we tested for fake, because the Chinese were sending us honey and they called it #1 Canadian honey, and so then we started testing to see if there was Canadian pollen, because apparently that's a fairly easy test. And so then they just started buying pollen from Canada, dumping Canadian pollen in their fake honey, and then it'd send it back and it would pass the test, of course. So now they've had to come up with some new tests that are much more expensive, of course, but it's been interesting. So but yeah, most people don't know this, but Alberta produces about half of Canada's honey, and half of our export of honey anyway. So it's about 40 million pounds a year. So it's pretty big deal for us. That's part of the like diversified economy that we have in Alberta. So so I seen Andrew back there for a second, but
I'm here. I'm back here again. I will. So I'm on my phone right now, so the sound might not be quite as good. And as soon as you can see here, as soon as the laptop finishes updating, I'll hop back on that. Hopefully the audio will be better.
Yeah, the audio is doing fine, and we just got a couple minutes left here anyway. So but yeah, Andrew, I just want to thank you for coming on with us tonight. That's been great. I do have some big news. I'm not sure if you heard or not, but we're catching up to the Scheers in the Viersen household.
Fantastic!
Baby number 5 on the way. So I always bug my friend Garnet Jennis that I'm in a running gun battle with him. We both had four children. So now I said I'm keeping up to the Scheers, so to speak. So
well, big congratulations. I know that's fantastic. Someone there's a comedian called Jim Gaffigan who has a great line about so I don't know if you've ever heard his line about having a 4th baby. He said that some people asked me what it was like to have after having all these kids have a 4th baby come along, and he said imagine yourself drowning and then someone throws you a baby. That's what having number 4 is like. The number 5 must be, even more hectic.
Yeah. I'm hoping eventually they start taking care of each other. Like.
Oh yeah.
And any good advice? Any good advice for the 5th child?
Definitely, we get our we get number 1 to babysit number 5 a lot. We get number 2 to babysit number 4 and 5 often. We found out after our first couple kids that if you and or your wife, hopefully both of you, can get at least 6 hours of sleep, then you can kind of handle anything. So finding a way to make sure that well-rested parents are all the difference in the world. It's the key to a calm and happy household, I'm sure. It's a little bit like on on the planes when they tell you that you have to put your put your oxygen mask on first before you play a child. I always think, like, if the parents can be well rested and calm, it's better for all the other kids as well.
Good. Well, Andrew, I want to just thank you once again. I want to thank everyone else that joined us this evening. It looks like I recognize a bunch of the names, so it looks like we got a good representation from all over the riding. Thanks for joining us in the Promised Land virtually. Not only are we flowing with milk and honey, we also have the municipal districts of peace and opportunity. And we're all settled on a promise called Treaty Number 8. And so if I can one day get this riding renamed the Promised Land, I will be sure to do that. So Andrew, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time this evening. And
well, my pleasure, Arnold. And I just want to thank all of you who are on this call. Thanks for your support of Arnold. He is just a fantastic colleague. I'm not kidding when I say that he's a great advocate for his riding. He's up in caucus. We're not allowed to discuss what happens at caucus, but I can tell you that Arnold is up at the mics often talking about issues that are important to his riding or what he believes would benefit his constituency. He is a passionate defender of his own part of Northern Alberta, but of Western Canada as a whole. It's been a thrill to get to know him. I want to thank all of you for your support of Arnold. You know, we don't get to represent you in Ottawa unless you believe in us and you support us through various ways. And so thanks to everyone who's been on this call. Thanks for all your support for Arnold and for the party in general.
All right. Well, good night, everyone. And
Okay.
I want to thank Dale for being the IT guy and setting this all up for us tonight. So Dale works for me in Ottawa.
All right. Take care.